Well, welcome again to another one of my podcasts, and where you're listening to Down to Earth but Heavenly Minded, and I'm your host, Irv Risch, and we have been studying in the Book of Proverbs, and right now we are on lesson 33, and I'll have to say again because I recorded this yesterday, but I had some issues here. I'm fighting springtime allergies and kind of fighting my throat and my nose and my head. I take allergy pills, but I tell you, they just don't seem to work anymore. Maybe I've got immune to them or something. Well, today we're going to be looking at how do I avoid folly, and I'm just going to get on that screen here. Uh, and we'll be in Proverbs 5 and 6. Actually, in the next few podcasts, we're going to do 5, 6, and 7, but today we're going to be looking predominantly at 5 and 6. And how do I avoid folly? Well, let me just start this. And, well, the illusion of sexual freedom. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about that. I tell you, the world sure looks at it different than the Bible does. And, you know, us Christians even look at it different than what the Bible says. And it's because of the influence of our society that we live in, the world that we live in. Well, sex is a polarizing concept. It really is. And nobody likes to really talk openly about it. That's why it's kind of hard to teach on. It begins beautifully when a husband and wife were naked and unashamed in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2:25. But it went downhill when they decided to love themselves more than God or each other. You know, you can read Genesis 3 and then look at verses 5, 7, 12, and 22. Ever since, we've been terribly confused. You know, we need much wisdom to navigate between the proud lewdness of our culture and the traditional punditsness of us Christians. Both sides represent a foolish oversimplification of what God intended uh, sexuality to be. Uh, and, the simple can get caught in the middle, really. And that's what happens in our world. And confusion multiplies when culture is prudish and Christians are lewd. Just the opposite. Or when prudish Christians speak about sex as lewdly as the culture does, or lewd Christians uh, formed prudentish to fit in. And, we try to make our own mold of what we believe in. How can the simple find their way? And this is the question. Well, in chapter 5 of Proverbs, which we'll examine over this and the next podcast, Simon, really provides wisdom in the sexual realm. He suggests that not all is as it seems, verses 1 through 6, and that wrong choices have dire consequences, verses 7 through 14. Utter selfishness in the context of marital love is surprisingly intoxicating, verses 15 through 20. And those who think they know satisfaction better than God does have sprung their own trap, verses 21 to 23. Well, excuse me. Appearances are deceiving, especially when hormones are involved. And we all have hormones. Well, we're looking kind of at the culture's idea of sexual freedom, and it is its illusion. Don't be fooled. My son, be attentive to my wisdom Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of the forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. Verses 1 through 3. Well, Solomon begins Proverbs 5 with another reminder to listen to his wisdom. Verse 1. If we don't passively receive and actively seek instructions in the sexual realm, we endanger our lives. Once we receive it, though, our ears, receive it through our ears, we ought to keep discretion presumptuously in our hearts, as in Proverbs 4:21. And that advises us to do the same thing. That it changes who we are, affecting what we do, especially with our lips. Verse 2, our lips must guard knowledge, because honey drips from the forbidden woman's lips. Her speech is so smooth, it makes oil seem irritating. So we ought to be ready. Verse 3. Well, before continuing, let's clarify who the forbidden woman is. Remember that Proverbs is a work of poetic wisdom literature, and as such, we have to look at it as such. As poetry, it makes liberal use of imagery to invoke the emotional reaction. But as wisdom's literature, it assumes we think hard about what we're reading. You know, earlier in Proverbs, Solomon engaged in portraying of his character the bumbling gang of thieves, if you remember. And that was in the very first chapter, verses 10 through 19. And the lady wisdom, the mocking street preacher in Proverbs 1, verses 20 through 33. The adulteress, whose house sank through the ground into the grave, chapter 2, verses 16 through 19. We're just kind of reviewing what we've read. And he does this in this imagery when he writes. And the sheep deprived, furious evildoers in Proverbs 4, verses 14 through 17. And these are all kind of reviews of how Solomon uses all this imagery as he wrote the book of Proverbs. And that's because it is poetic wisdom literature. Now, Solomon paints such an over-re-emphasizing picture of his subject to strengthen his point. He takes a character type and vividly describes the worst-case scenario for that type, thus including all variations of explicitness and severity. For example, in describing the violent gang, Solomon's assessment of all who want to get more stuff at the expense of others, Proverbs 1, verse 19. Through wisdom's speech, Solomon warns not only those who have already harmed themselves, but also everyone who loves being simple, Proverbs 1:22. When he warns against joining ravish evildoers, he warns us to avoid their highway, not just their practical rest stop. We shouldn't risk even entering it, Proverbs 4, verse 14. So you can see what's going on here. Who then is the forbidden woman? In Proverbs 5, she includes loose women who tried a tire of their husband, but she ultimately represents every enticement to sexual immorality that you and I, whether male or female, experience. Solomon is clear about this fact when he broadens his final application to include not just adulterers and not just sexual immoral people, but all the wicked, who shows great folly. And we find that in verses 22 and 23 of this chapter. Well, whenever your gender, age, or mental status, or this chapter of Proverbs applies to you. In fact, this chapter can help if your temptation involves the opposite sex. The same sex, solo sex, or images on the computer monitor. The forbidden woman still drips her honey at you, and you had better watch out. Therefore, for the sake of clarity, I'll use the word immorally in future references to referring to the opponent Solomon has in mind here. Well, the death of immorality. And when I think about the morals of this world, I know I've seen a lot change just in my day, and it's been changing through the century, and not for the better. It's been getting worse as we go along. Sexual freedom is an illusion because immoralities is not as pretty as it seems. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharper as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. And that's verses 4 through 6. We just looked at the adulteress is an image of all sexual immorality. Immorality has a sweet candy coated, but inside a bitter pill. Verse 4. Wormwood is a plant with a bitter taste. And that's what immorality is. It's once you move past the first impression, you'll find out what it is. Well, I know a guy who works in a chemistry company that works on both drugs and candy. Good combination. He told me that the outer shell of an M&M is the same as the shell of an Advil. Next time you have a chance, I dare you to chew an Advil. You'll find out it doesn't taste like an M&M. Well, immoralities lead only to death. Verse 5. The last thing it has in mind is our good. The first part of verse 6. In fact, it's not even aware of the harm it causes. The end of verse 6. Immorality is full of passion, but clueless and self-defeating, like a pompous freshman invited to a homecoming queen over for a video game. I tell you, that's a good illustration. How does this apply? Sexual immorality promises life, but the wise know in reality it gives death. We ought to be ready, especially for the battle of words. We have to expose immorality's sweet talk, that outer coating. We must remind ourselves of the truth. We need to talk about it often with others, to warn them and unhinge its power when we strip it of its secrecy. Well, I guess it was in 2008, this pastor Mark Driscoll of Mars Hills Church in Seattle shared some astonishing statistics about sexual immoralities in America. Now, mind you, this is quite a few years ago. This is 2021. So we're looking back quite a few years. So things have gotten a lot worse since these statistics were talked about. Pornography is a $60 million a year annual industry globally. It's $12 million of that is spent by Americans. This is more money than is spent on pro baseball, basketball, and football combined. Over 200 porn films are made in the U.S. every week. 200 a week. Wow. That's more than one an hour. Porn sites are 12% of all internet sites. Porn is 25% of all search engine results. Every second, $3,000 is spent on porn in America. 28,000 internet users are viewing porn every second in America. Wow. And 372 internet users every second in America are typing in words looking for more porn. 90% of children between the ages of 8 and 16, something to think about, parents, have viewed porn online. The average child sees porn for the first time at the age of 11, online, usually inadvertently. Now, you can walk into a store and you see porn on the covers of papers and magazines. It's all around. Death surrounds us, and its cover is pretty makeup and stage lighting. We must talk about it frankly, yet graciously, for no one who indulges in it will go unharmed. It'll take you down to the pit, and that's where I'm going to leave my podcast today. And I'm sorry I had to redo it the last time I did this podcast. I was really sounding pretty bad. I'm a little better today, so. Well, with that said, I'm going to end our podcast like I usually do. God is out here. You can find him. Just open up your Bibles, and you'll find him. With that said, I'm going to leave you. Have a great day. Lord bless.